Hey, it's Jordan, and I am delighted to be joined once again by Shahid Buttar. You are a community organizer in San Francisco, and you are running against Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We've spoke before, but I wanted to get you on this week, get an update on your campaign also. But I think we need to get her primary challenger reaction to what I think, she's been kind of poking at the progressive bear a little bit over the last few months. Some dismissive comments against Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, the others like Congresswoman Tlaib, Congresswoman Omar, Congresswoman Ayanna Presley. But it kind of escalated to recently in the New York Times dismissing them. And just yesterday, the House Democrats' Twitter account tweeting out really kind of deceiving tweet attacking Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff. So obviously, House Democrats don't put out on their official Twitter anything without making sure it's okay. Just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts? Obviously, you're running against Pelosi on the issues, but the overwhelming kind of battle that seems to be erupting in the party, she's obviously at the forefront of that.
Yeah, there's no question when you say that Speaker Pelosi is poking the progressive bear, another way to put that is that Speaker Pelosi is actively promoting conservative interests at a time when we are witnessing profound human rights abuses of the sort that, frankly, the world hasn't seen in a very long time, at a time that progressives are trying to answer a urgent global need to address an urgent mounting global climate crisis, while we're trying to meet the needs of the American people. The Speaker, instead, is waging a scorched earth campaign to shut down the most visionary, insightful, the most popular voices in the party. And I think that her consistent attempts to undermine the future and her ongoing attempts to enshrine the past, I think is dangerous to the country. I think it reveals how unfit she is to continue serving as the Speaker, at least, and I hope to replace her as the elected representative in California's 12th congressional district next year.
And obviously the media loves conflict and a food fight, so they've been focused on that. But underneath it all, Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman AOC, was pointing out that the Speaker basically agreed to a bill that I think was a victory for President Trump and McConnell, gave more funding for what they're doing with on the border and this contrived crisis. That's being lost in it, but basically she, to me, gave away the farm on this border bill.
There's absolutely no question. As a constitutional lawyer who's been fighting the rise of authoritarianism in the country for the last 20 years, I see very clearly how the approval for concentration camps lays another cornerstone in the foundation of the fascism we are trying to prevent from consolidating itself. And I want to zoom back from the current time slice to lay this out. We already have adopted profiling according to race, religion, even point of view, effectively, unapologetically by police. We've already allowed, in any number of cases, hundreds a year, impunity for state violence that leaves innocent people dead without charge or trial. We've already approved warrantless surveillance that leaves our country in the United States, despite having a Fourth Amendment to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, our country is more monitored by our government than any population in the history of humankind, with the exception of China today. And we've already accepted, for instance, impunity for state torture. These are all, every single one of them would be alone enough to meet the definition of authoritarianism. And when I would raise these concerns with any of my colleagues, for instance, from my law school class or my colleagues when I was working in the nonprofits here in DC, the consistent refrain would be, yes, those are bad things, but we don't have concentration camps yet. And I hate to tell you, I told you so. I think it's a lame response, and frankly, it's not very satisfying. But I've been warning about this my entire career. And to see the Speaker actively emboldening a corrupt criminal administration, not only failing to hold him accountable through the impeachment mechanism that is screaming out to be used, but then actively facilitating human rights abuses at the border by funding immigration enforcement agencies that are rogue agencies. I was just at the border in San Diego 2 days ago, investigating firsthand what was happening at the Otay Mesa detention facility. And what I learned from human rights advocates on the ground is, frankly, even more alarming than what we've heard about in the press. And I'm writing about that now. I look forward to continuing to draw that contrast. And, as long as Speaker Pelosi is going to be actively campaigning for me to replace her, which is what she's effectively doing at the moment, I have a I want to say it's an ambivalence because I would frankly much rather prefer that she show up for work, do her job of holding this criminal president accountable, denying funding to criminal agencies, supporting human rights, and frankly supporting the visionary future voices of the caucus, precisely the names that you cited, Representatives Presley, Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, Omar. These are the voices that will meet the needs of the future, that are already trying to meet the needs of the future, and the Speaker's attempt again to defend the past in the face of that urgent need to turn a corner is more than just disturbing, it is disqualifying.
And, you know, it's interesting because she is playing this game where she's criticizing them. Do not tweet bad things against our moderate members. Our moderate members are how we won back the House. And basically,
fully fanged without any reservation.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It's preposterous.
The hypocrisy is pretty thick.
It's not. It's hypocrisy, and it's institutionally defensive hypocrisy. You know, hypocrisy is one thing if it just stands in isolation. But when the hypocrisy defends authoritarianism from the position of being the supposed leader of the opposition party, that is unacceptable. And we as progressives, we as Democrats, even frankly liberal centrist Democrats should not put up with this. And frankly, I hope that they come increasingly to see how the Speaker has been at best ineffective in challenging our criminal president. And I fear the worst, which is to say potentially co-opted. And I can't tell the difference, frankly, because as long as she's playing on Trump's team as actively and unapologetically as she is, Democrats need to make some choices. And there's a lot of choices to make, among them who should be the Speaker in the next session, and for the people of San Francisco, who should be our elected representative, our voice in Congress in the next session. And when Pelosi was funding Bush's wars, I was waging direct action in the streets to try to stop them. When Pelosi was approving Obama's surveillance, I was fighting in the courts, in the policy sphere, and again in the street, and through my musical propaganda to stop that. When Pelosi was funding Trump's concentration camps, without, mind you, ever visiting the border herself to see firsthand the abuses that continue there, I went a couple of days ago. There is a very sharp contrast to members of Congress whose MO is to defend their own power and their own institutional prerogatives versus people who show up to defend their communities. And I'm there to do the job. And I would just say this, to swear an oath of office, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, with a president like this in office, who is clearly the foremost threat to our Constitution, is an abdication of an oath, a responsibility, and it's not a casual responsibility. This is a protect the nation responsibility that the Speaker is advocating. And again, it is unacceptable. This whole idea that the progressives should silence themselves and allow the institutional corporate center to attack them unapologetically is just foolish. And frankly, we will be tweeting and we'll be doing a lot more to expose the hypocrisy and the co-optation of the centrists in the caucus.
Well, also, I want to ask you, I have you this morning, I don't know if you saw this tweet. If you didn't, President Trump tweeted out, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept anywhere in the world, if they even have a functioning government at all, now loudly and viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came?" I'm not going to read anymore. He was subtly referring to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar because the other three were born in the United States. This is what fascist dictators do. This is the messaging. And what's scary to me, and I'd like your thoughts, you can't beat that with country club republicanism, which is what we're talking about with Nancy Pelosi. I've heard some pretty bigoted things from Trump. That's fairly out there. He's basically saying, to the other, he's already painted Ilhan Omar in deceptively edited videos, kind of trying to evoke her as, one with the terrorists. What are your thoughts? Because you just said Pelosi is funding what he is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that before. I'm glad you shared it with me. My blood is boiling as I'm internalizing my response. Now, I was born in England, and I'm from the Pakistani diaspora. And the biggest hole, I would say, in the president's so-called analysis is that the countries he's talking about that might struggle with governance issues, many of those issues stem from U.S. imperialism and continuing neocolonialism. So the canard entirely misses the point. Further, as a post-colonial representative of a diaspora. I am very inspired to live in this country at this point in time, not because our country introduced democracy to the modern world, though it did, and I find that inspiring, not because we have fought a world war to establish a human rights regime around the world that we now violate casually without apology, though, the legacy of that human rights regime also inspires me. I'm proud and inspired to be here now because this country needs immigrants to remind us what we said on paper about what our supposed commitments are, including due process, including freedom of speech, including rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, including the right to practice one's faith without being attacked by one's government. This used to be our founding principle. It appears in the First Amendment to our written Constitution, and yet our president is ignorant of these principles, acting flagrantly in violation of those founding principles. And I think it's very telling that it takes the people he's talking about to practice fidelity to what makes us American, to what makes us all American. And I would challenge the president. I mean, I would say that his comment makes all too clear that the voices he's criticizing, those of us who are progressives, and particularly those of us who might come from other countries, we are more American than he is. And I would dare him to show up and challenge me to that. I think that he is, quite frankly, not only a criminal, not only a kleptocrat, not only the greatest domestic threat to our Constitution, he is an aspiring fascist tyrant. And it's all the reason why I think the House needs to show up and initiate the impeachment proceedings that have been screaming out since he first went into office to continue. I want to pause and make a quick digression here. There's a lot of conversation about how supposedly impeachment is a futile exercise because we don't have the votes in the Senate. And that is the most resignatory concession, frankly, I've ever heard. We know that we will win votes in the Senate if a sustained process triggering news cycles puts Democratic Party activists in red and purple states in a position to force their senators to choose between the president's future and their own. And we know that that entire party is craven enough. They're not going to practice solidarity. That's not how they work. They will save themselves if we force them to. And if the train never leaves the station because Speaker Pelosi won't let it, we know it will never reach the destination. But there's a very strong chance that it could if she simply shows up for work, does the job that she pledged no to do. And whether it's enriching himself through his office, whether it's lying to the public and the press and the policymakers, not just about any discrete thing, but literally everything that comes out of that man's voice is out of his mouth is a lie. Any of those issues are impeachable offenses, let alone collusion, obstruction of justice, serial crimes against women. These are, and the biggest issue here is that if we don't impeach this president, we are making an open invitation to any limit of lawlessness by future administrations. If Speaker Pelosi doesn't do her job here, it is a tacit invitation to future presidents to do whatever they want, and I am not willing to let the Republic descend into such depths on my watch. I've been a constitutional lawyer for 20 years. I've been defending the rights of Americans from governments of both administrations. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have been, frankly, assaulting the Constitution and the American people for as long as I've been a lawyer. I came out of law school at Stanford in 2003, and I've never seen the United States government, even under President Obama, respect international human rights commitments, again, that we fought a world war to defend. I've never seen the U.S. government fully respect our Constitution. And if anybody, forgets, well, I don't want to chase a rabbit here, but I would just say particularly the phenomenon and the plague, let's say, of police violence against unarmed people that continues across our country. There's so many lenses through which to witness the rise of authoritarianism in this country. And this is a dire time for the country to choose not only sustainability in the face of the mounting global climate crisis, not only sane alternatives to militarism and racism that Martin Luther King derided in his era, but we have to simply defend liberty at a time like this because our most core fundamental values are threatened. And even that, quite frankly, is too charitable because they're not just threatened, they are in the toilet, and we have to resuscitate these values. We need to redeclare our commitments to peace, to liberty, to freedom, to due process, to the core constitutional commitments that we already wrote and approved. And I think that the abdication of centrist Democrats of their constitutional responsibility forces people like the progressives in the House, forces people like me to run for office. I'm not doing this because I want to. I am doing this because the times are an urgent call for all of us to step up. This is no time to be silent. This is no time to sit on our hands. And this is no time for anyone to merely sit back and watch. We all have to engage fully at the moment to defend ourselves and the future from these tyrants.
And, you know, the corporate media, they love this notion, oh, if there's all this infighting among the Democratic Party, you're going to lose to Trump. I mean, all you got to do is look back. There was the Tea Party against, you know, civil war in the Republican Party. They took back the House in 2010. They took all of Congress in 2014 with this infighting. You had the Freedom Caucus kicking and screaming and fighting with more establishment Republicans. So this notion that progressives actually not just being silent in the back of the room is going to reelect Trump, if anything, wouldn't it be the opposite? If the same people that lost to Trump in the first place are allowed to just run roughshod, you have the same result.
Exactly. It is self-protection is where that claim comes from. And I think you made the point, particularly the one I was going to jump on, is that these are the same people who put Trump in office. We shouldn't be deferring to them about any sense of what's going to get him out of office. And when I say the same people, I'm talking about Speaker Pelosi. I'm talking about the centrists. I'm talking about the mainstream media that helped create him. You know, these are exactly the people who lost their credibility in 2016. And the idea that anyone should listen to them today would require burying our heads in the sand and ignoring their documented failures. I'll leave it at that.
And let's focus on San Francisco for those who haven't heard from you before. Speaker Pelosi has been a congresswoman from there for a very long time. Anyone who's been to San Francisco recently knows that it is a very pretty accurate symbol of the rest of the country, too. You have an explosion in homelessness. Rent has gone up. I don't even know what the percentage is, but it's very hard to live there if you're native to San Francisco. Silicon Valley obviously has played a big role in that. Talk about your campaign. What are you seeing out there? You're doing a lot of, organizing, grassroots kind of communication. What are you seeing? And do you think you have a shot against Pelosi, who has won by very large margins when she has been contested?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of support around the city. It's quite frankly stunning and also very humbling. In the last cycle, in the 2018 round, when I ran against Pelosi as well, I got more votes against her from the left than any primary challenger in 10 years. We got as many votes as Representative Ocasio-Cortez did in her primary. We did it in 3 months without media attention. I have a whole year now. We're getting media attention. Thank you very much for bringing me on. And frankly, we have hundreds of volunteers at this point. We're doing daily mobilizations, and every crowd that I've had a chance to get in front of, frankly, we win, because the current status quo that the speaker defends is frankly so, it is just unsustainable. And I don't mean just in the climate sense unsustainable. I mean, it is untenable in the first place. It's preposterous, frankly, what San Francisco has been asked to put up with, given that we are arguably the nation's most progressive city, and we're represented by the most conservative member of the Bay Area's congressional delegation. You know, across the Bay, we have Barbara Lee in Oakland. Down the Bay, we have Ro Khanna in San Jose. It's preposterous to me that San Francisco is not represented by a voice as progressive as those cities. If you look at the population, so San Francisco has a storied reputation as a home of countercultures that inspired the free speech movement, the movement for peace, and against the wars of our military-industrial complex. It's a region that helped play a crucial role in the movement for regenerative agriculture and climate justice, and yet we are represented by a defender of the past. And as long as every chance we have an opportunity to make that case, San Franciscans come with us, not just the longstanding people who are dedicated to the city's deep-seated and proud progressive history, but even newcomers. You know, you mentioned people in tech, and people forget that people in tech are disproportionately A, young, B, progressive, and C, able to leverage any number of opportunities, whether it's their resources, their social media presence, their in-person social capital with their friends. The tech community is pivotal in San Francisco, and I'm winning the tech vote. We're going to win the Latino vote. We're working on the Chinese-American vote. That's a pretty substantial portion of the city, and so that's an area where we need to and will continue to make more inroads. But our endorsements, I think, reflect our momentum. We've been endorsed by figures including Sean King, the journalist and author, very prominent voice in the movement for Black Lives. We've been endorsed by Linda Sarsour, one of the co-founders of the Women's March, which I think is very telling, given the speaker's claim to feminism, which I frankly would challenge. I mean, I think it's unassailable that I am a more sincere intersectional feminist than the speaker has ever, frankly, attempted or claimed to be. We've been endorsed also by Dr. Cornel West, by two former members of the Board of Supervisors, including its former president. They're Matt Gonzalez and Eric Marr. And we just have to get the word out. You know, we've got signs up around the city already. It's a year out. And the ground game mobilizations, we were on the street this week for the Lights of Liberty demonstrations on Friday night while I was investigating the border facility outside San Diego. We're active on many different fronts, and I'm looking very forward to winning the race next November.
And how can people find out more about your campaign?
You can check us out online at www.shahidforchange.us. That's SHAHID, like David, FORCHANGE.US, or on any of the major social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, at Shahid for Change.
Thanks for being available so quick. I thought it was important to get your input, and I know we'll be in touch as the campaign develops.
Right on. Thanks for reaching out.
Thanks.
Out front tonight, chaos at the White House. President Trump's deputy chief of staff, his communications director, is
just because of their connection to President Trump. And I know you've been saying...
We learned recently that Donald Trump threatened to sue his former schools if...
Tired of hearing about Trump 24/7? Become a member at statuscoup.com for only $10 a month. Click the notification. With your help, we can start the media revolution.
And before Bernie went on stage, I spoke with his supporters online here, and you really get that feeling from